Hey guys, it's time for some more Community Starcraft 2. I'm your host, Magnet, and today's video, as you guys can see, is going to be Terran versus Terran openers. So this should be fairly interesting. This will be basically telling you all the little strategic elements of TvT. We're going to watch some replays from some good players, and I'll break it down into information that you will find useful to apply into your own games. Or at least that's the goal. So we'll see what we can do here. Let's go ahead and jump into the game, and we'll just get started right away. Now this is a replay from the Midwest Pro-Am, which is a tournament that I actually casted, so I have very good knowledge of this game, and I felt like this was a really good one to start off with, considering it starts out with mirror builds, since these guys kind of, this is what you would think of in a mirror matchup, as both players kind of doing the same thing. So you can see both of them opening pretty much the same. I guess I should say the builds aren't the same, but the result in the mid-game and stuff is the same. Now, I guess the first thing we should mention is the gas timing for both these guys. You're going to really want to center it around your strategy, and if you open with something like Reapers, you'll typically get the gas on the same supply you started your barracks. These guys both went for a little later gas, so they're just going to grab a factory afterward. Probably going to expand pretty early on as well, so that's what the story is with these builds right now. So, yeah, we'll just have to see where this goes, and it looks like the Reaper actually is coming out here for Spectre. He was the one that did get the faster gas out of the two players, so the thing you really have to worry about the most in TvT is that if you're going to be defending Reapers, you need to make sure you have enough Marines, or at least some kind of tech out to defend like 4 or 5 Reapers. That's a problem that can happen in a lot of games where people just won't make enough Marines and then they'll get killed by a Reaper rush or something. They'll proxy a second barracks and just dump out Reapers as fast as they can, but that's obviously not what we're seeing in this game. You don't see it a ton at high levels, but there actually is a second barracks on the way. And maybe I'm thinking of a different game, and I just barely said we won't see that this game, but I think this barracks actually is for Reaper. But the weird thing is that he's not spending his money. Okay, there we go. So yeah, this is going to be a lot of Reapers here, and we can demonstrate, at least in this game, how to defend a high number of Reapers. So the first thing you need to do is, of course, keep producing Marines, and the Marauder opener here from Mario is really, really good. The weird thing, though, is that you're not going to have this kind of information. This is kind of a blind counter, the Marauder with shells. I think that's because these guys know each other, but this will at least demonstrate one opener you can run that will defend against it. Otherwise, you're going to want to go for probably a second barracks worth of Marines, or maybe a really fast reactor on your barracks so you can get Marines out quickly enough. But these guys are just going to kind of trade blows a little bit, both of them getting a command center as well. One theme we're going to stick with throughout most of this is that putting up a command center behind your aggression in TvT is the safest way to get expansions, and we'll see this constantly. So this is kind of the first part of it, is that Spectre's being aggressive here with his Reapers, but he knows that he can take an expansion behind this, because there's no way Mario can really leave his base at risk of losing his entire mineral line. So that's the whole idea here in TvT, is that you're going to basically expand anytime that you have aggression going on. The surprise here, I should explain this, is that Mario is actually running a bio composition, whereas he is notoriously a mech player, and that's what's weird going on in this game right now. But the expansion's coming down here for Mario. His does complete first, or actually, yeah, it did complete first, but they both landed and started mining at about the same time. So the difference was that Mario had to create his command center on the high ground because he was the one being attacked, and Spectre could create his on the low ground. So now behind this, of course, with any biocomposition, you want to start getting reactored medevacs out, so that's what's coming up here. And there's all sorts of different timings in this matchup as far as when you can be aggressive and when you can't. So you kind of need to know your opener, need to know what your opponent has, and kind of continually gauge the situation and figure out when you can start to be aggressive. So both these guys just kind of competing for watchtowers right now, not a ton going on. And the interesting thing that's coming down right now here on a Spectre is the tank. The tanks are by far the most important units in TvT, just because of the amount of damage that they do and the likelihood that your opponent's going to be running either a lot of Marines or a lot of Hellions in their compositions. So tanks are ridiculously important, and we'll see a lot of that in later games, and especially in this game as well. We're going to go over a lot how to handle Marine tank, which is what both these guys eventually get into. Let's talk a little bit about the compositions that are available in TvT. Actually, let's just wait for this attack to occur here. Now, the first two medevacs are out. There's no tanks out here for Mario, and you can see that the tank completely pushes this away for the time being, and Mario just has to walk back home. So there's not a whole lot you can do. I mean, you can just try and drop and mess up the opponent by just getting in the back of their mineral line and stuff, but you can see that the coverage is good with the tanks. It usually shouldn't do too much unless he makes a mistake, considering he has a lot of Marines here that can just run over and deal with that as well. This is another thing we're going to see a lot, is that if there's a tank and you can break it by using dropships filled with various units, but even still, that I wouldn't call that attack profitable. He wasted 6 supply worth of units, or actually that's more than that, that's 10 supply worth of units, just to kill 1 tank. And that's not a good trade. You really want to trade more effectively than that, but like I was saying, we'll get more into, this is a bad rally, we'll get more into the compositions that you can run against each other, and the main compositions you're going to see in this matchup are either Marine Tank or Tank Viking are really common, especially at lower levels, just because they're so standard and they have such a universal mentality. They don't require a lot of different units to be strong, just a couple of different units. Some other things you can do are things like straight up Marine Marauder, but that's usually only better against a mech player. And when we say mech, we mean they're only making stuff out of factories and no barracks production, which we'll see a little later as well. And of course the last composition being mech, which is a lot of tanks, a lot of Hellions and Hellbats, and sometimes you can mix in things like Thors, eventually get into stuff like battlecruisers. There's a lot of versatility in this matchup. Almost every single unit in this matchup can be viable in large numbers. So we're going to see a little bit of a positioning battle here. This is something you can do with a lot of medevacs, is just kind of counterattack when your opponent's out of position. That's the whole theme of Bio, is that you have the mobility and he has the power. So if you have the mobility and you can get around to points where his army isn't, then you'll be in good shape here. But this turns into a really long game, and I want to get to the points where the fights are a little more important here. You'll notice that if there's a siege up position that your Marines are attacking into, you're going to get wasted in that attack. So be wary of who is sieging up when and how you're handling the different attacks. You can see this strong Marine force pushing Mario all the way back to his base. But for the Terrans, you can see both of them actually do have these sensor towers, and that's really, really important in this matchup, considering the strength of positioning in this matchup. Basically, whoever gets the better position with their siege tanks can make a lot happen when they otherwise shouldn't be able to. And we'll kind of see that a little bit throughout this game. We'll outline it when that's happening as well. But there's just not a lot happening right now in this game so far. Of course, the Marines are trying to attack here. If you can split off little groups and try and take out these tanks, it's definitely going to be worth it. So getting a lead in the tank count is a big deal. Almost kind of like getting the Colossus lead in PvP, but not quite as crippling. But if you guys are both running the same unit composition, and one of you has a few tank lead, you can really exploit that to gain huge advantages in battles. Even a count like 12 to 9. If you just go straight up against each other, then the 12 tank count will win enormously, unless the other player has really unusually good position. But a little more attacks here. Here's actually a massive drop here into the main. This is something you can do as well with the medevacs, and especially with tanks if you can ever fortify the position. But you don't want to fly into turrets like we're seeing here. That's kind of not a good thing. By kind of I mean a really not a good thing. So tanks destroying everything. We can just go ahead and fast forward for all this stuff. Strategy continues here. Marine tank is pretty linear, but we'll point out issues in which these guys could have transitioned and probably won at different points in the game if they just decided to change their composition. The upgrades are enormous though for both these guys. Marine tank, you're going to want to get the +1 upgrades as soon as possible on your bio, and then the +1 attack on your tanks as soon as possible. So you can see he has 3 upgrades spinning at once, or at least he would if that one didn't just finish up. And the upgrades are huge. I mean, if you're running the exact same composition against your opponent and you're behind in upgrades and you get a fight where the upgrades really play an important role, especially on Marines, then you're going to have a really hard time dealing with that. So, yeah, we're just going to have to wait for a little longer for these guys to start attacking each other once again. And as far as, I should mention all the scans that are being dropped. Eventually there's going to be a point in the game when you're on 3 fully mining bases that you just don't have that great of a need for mules anymore. And it's more important to know where your opponent is. So you can use cheaper things like sensor towers, just set them around the map just to kind of figure out where your opponent is. So you can see Mario just has sensor towers all over the place, and you can see the rings on the mini-map that show you what's going on. But especially later, you need to be able to scan your opponent's army over and over, and if you're listening to the game sounds, excuse me, you can hear that there's just constant scans going on. So here we go. Here's what I want to talk about a little bit. We want to talk about the positioning of Marines and tanks in a fight. This is kind of similar to TvZ where you're using mines, but the idea is to siege your tanks up in a good position, send your Marines forward, especially if your opponent is not sieged. Attack with your Marines, and as soon as you see your opponent siege, back up and try to bait his Marines into your tanks. This is going to be a constant theme of TvT battles. So the idea is that you want tanks hitting Marines, and you want the Marines eventually get to a point where there's a bunch of naked tanks like this, so you can just drop them on top of the medevac, or drop the Marines on top of the tanks with the medevacs. So you can see, just because of that fight right there, this whole army is basically missing. There's nothing underneath there, and the supplies are hugely in favor of Spectre right now. And it's frustrating, I know, just to lose an entire battle or maybe an entire game from your Marines just walking out of position by a few hexes. So if you're really having a hard time with that, just switch into mech, and maybe you'll be more comfortable with a composition like that. Let me actually change one thing that's getting a little bit annoying. I'm going to turn off the life bars unless it's important. There we go. It's a little easier to see now. Okay, so we'll continue on here. And yeah, you can't afford to leave your tanks out naked like this. So if Spectre realized what was going on, he could have easily dropped all of his Marines on top of these tanks and traded just perfectly well. And the whole idea is that, of course, if tanks are sieged, they can't fire maybe within this radius around them. So their radius is basically, it extends as far as these lines, but there is a small point about right here where they can't actually hit something on themselves. And they also do splash damage, so if you're dropping Marines on top of tanks and the tanks are shooting the Marines, they're also going to hurt their own tanks as well. So, I mean, you'll see that be more of a theme, I think, either later in this game and most definitely in some later replays. But, yeah, both these guys just trying to figure out what's going on, trying to get positioning. Of course, Mario knows that this army is over here, so we can start doing something about it if he were to move his. And you can see him dropping scans once again. The positioning of the army is really important, and if you can ever catch your opponent on siege, it's going to be a big, big win for you. So that's definitely something you need to look out for. Again, I know there's just mirror compositions, not a lot of fights going on. Both these guys trying to feel out what they could get going here. Now, as we covered in the macro video, of course, especially as Terran, you need to make sure you have enough barracks and production buildings to keep up on your upgrades, or rather to keep up on your spending, so that you can always have money in the bank. So, okay, let's say we're Spectre right now. Let's just ignore this attack for the time being. Let's say you have this kind of money, and you are maxed out. If you're fighting something like Marine Tank, you need to start thinking about how you can get a longer-term advantage. The thing I really like from Mario is he's actually added on some extra factories, which are right here, so he can produce more tanks. He knows that if he can ever get a lead in the tank wars, then he will have a big advantage in the game because it's so hard to attack into tanks. But at the same time, that starts leaving him vulnerable to things like battlecruiser switches because he won't have enough Marines to deal with that. So if you're maxed out like this, and you don't have a ton of production buildings, you need to start thinking about what your next stage of tech is going to be. And battlecruisers definitely are the next stage of tech here, along with things like Ravens and Vikings. The air control is a really big deal, which we're not seeing in this game, and you typically don't see in Marine Tank versus Marine Tank. But in other games you're going to see that just having a Viking lead is going to make a big difference. So just look out for that, I suppose. So here comes the attack. We're going to see a little bit of that micro right now. Both these guys are sieging up at basically the same time. Mario sieges just a little faster. So what you want to do as Mario is you want to try and bait these Marines down the ramp into these tanks and then not take shots on your own Marines. I'm going to slow this down so you guys can see what's going on in this fight. So both of them siege up. Look at all the Marines being absolutely wasted. For Spectre here, there's just groups everywhere that are being torched, and then if you run your own Marines up there, these tanks are obviously going to get shots off, but Spectre's already lost a lot in this fight. This is kind of a weird fight because the tanks are in perfect position on both sides to deal with the Marines. So all of Mario's tanks are back here and Spectre's Marines are on the right, so he's totally in range of the Marines right there. And same goes for Spectre. All of the Marines are perfectly in range for Mario, and they're both just getting blasted away. So neither one of them getting a perfect engagement here, but you can see how fast stuff will die if we just let it go. So you can see Mario just decided to disengage, and he's just going to go around because he realized that his tanks are being completely overrun by these Marines. But at the same time, he still traded okay. The supplies are actually even right now, and he was behind in supply before this started. So there's a lot of weird situations you can get yourself into. And now these tanks have to unsiege, and while they're sieging, you can try and run up there and pick off a couple. Losing a handful of Marines is not the worst thing in the world, but Mario's attack is definitely over by this point. So now let's take a look at the tank count. The tank count is 11 to 8 in favor of Spectre, and if Spectre were to be super aggressive right now, especially if he spent his money, he's having a little bit of a hard time with that. But if he were to be super aggressive right now with his tank advantage, he could get a really good position here, maybe even deny a base like this. He could split off a couple of medevacs full of Marines for drops and try to multi-prong Mario while he's busy trying to recover from that attack. There's a lot of things that he can do that will help him out here. So, whoops, let's go ahead and get started. Again, see, these Marines are basically forfeit if he continues to try and fight with them. More tanks and everything rallying up here. But Spectre has great positioning, so if you're Mario, you have to realize, especially if you drop scans and stuff, that there's no way you're ever going to break this army, but you are still intent on doing damage. Then all over here is open. You can maybe run your Marines all the way up into the main base, but how much are you going to sacrifice doing that remains to be seen. So we'll have to see how he handles this situation. So as we can see, you never want to let the Marines drift into tank range, because all those Marines just died instantly. Mario's attacks being kind of shoved back here just a little bit, and the supplies would be a lot more reflective of that if Spectre was just spending his money a little bit better. But, yeah, continuing on, both these guys getting 3-3. Mario's tanks coming out 4 at a time is a big deal here, though. And, especially for Spectre, you need to start thinking about how you're going to deal with stuff like that. But the interesting thing is that behind Mario's aggression, he's been able to take more command centers than his opponent. As you can see, he now has a 5th up. And like we were talking about before, Mario's been aggressive the whole time, and that's the points where you need to expand. You're going to have a lot harder time expanding if your opponent's on top of you the whole game. And like we were talking about, since TvT is so much about positioning, if you can just get an ideal position on your opponent, then they either have to risk losing their entire army to try and break that, and it'll most of the times be unsuccessful, or they have to try and find ways to go around. Notice the little scouting moves with this medevac to try and figure out where the army is. And now all of a sudden look at the positioning for Mario. He can get on top of his production structures, and if you can ever get there against a Terran, I don't care what matchup it is, then you're going to win the game. So, siege up's coming down here, and there's definitely an advantage, at least a spotting advantage right now for Spectre, because he does have the high ground. But even still, this is a little scary. Mario can always drop on top of these tanks. He can always start trying to gain position inside the main here. You'll see a lot of TvTs end this way, especially with a lot of tanks on the field. That one person will get their production sieged up and the other person will just have a hard time breaking it for the rest of the game. And if I remember right, I think that's actually what happens in this game. Still, I have to point to the fact that Spectre has so much money. If he just had the production structures, like maybe 4 or 5 starports ready to make battlecruisers, this would make breaking this really easy, because then he could start trying to lure the Marines into his own tanks with the battlecruisers, and he'll have enough armor and health and stuff to tank a little bit of damage on the Marines. But he could also drop you model cannons on these tanks and just even up the tank count easily. So you have to really be thinking about that. The other thing you need to be thinking about if you have this much money is, how can I get a better army? And one way you can do that is to start dumping SCVs and just make extra command centers and start just using mules to mine for you so that you have more supply freed up to make army. So you should see that stuff more often than you really do, to be totally honest. Not a lot of players actually get to that point, but there's really no reason not to, especially if you have this much money. You need a stronger army than your opponent, and that's what's going to win the game. You don't need that many workers. So here's a perfect example. Spectre's army out here is pretty small. But because he has positioning right now, he's going to get a really good trade on this army if that army decides to commit. This Mario army may actually still win because it is a lot larger, but the idea of trades is that you want to be as cost efficient as possible. If you try to run into any number of siege tanks, especially at this stage in the game where the tanks have really good upgrades, +2, that'll be pretty messy. So to see how he handles this. And the stim up, and look at him trying to bait the Marines into the fire here. Now he re-engages with his Marines, and now all of Mario's tanks are not really sieged right now. And it looks like Spectre got absolutely demolished there, but he lost 4 tanks, maybe about half of his Marines. He broke this positioning for Mario. Now he's in a great spot in this game because he still has 2 medevacs filled with Marines that he got out of there as well. So the 20 supply lead makes a lot of sense right now. But again, you just have to point to the fact that he's not making very much with his leftover money right now, and it's starting to really hurt him. So we're continuing the Marine tank wars, and at some point we're going to hit a tipping point. I mean, look at the tank count right now. 13 to 11, but the production is still 4 at a time for Mario, and Spectre isn't even making tanks right now. So eventually it's going to get to a point where there's just way too many tanks, and just making one mistake will end the game for sure. So we'll have to see if and when that happens. A lot of stuff still rallying forward for Mario right now. And he's still just seeking position, both of them scanning each other a lot to try and figure out what's going on. You can see scans just constantly all over the map. And here we go. a small little group of Marines comes up here, and if these tanks are ever undefended, this is a risk that you can run. You're going to lose a lot of tanks when you really shouldn't, and look at the tank count now, 17 to 5. That's a big, big deal. Even killing the rest of these tanks would put Spectre on basically nothing, meaning Mario can get whatever position he wants with his tanks, if he were so inclined, but I'm actually going slower than I need to. So, yeah, that's definitely growing to be a huge problem, is the tank count right now, 17 to 1. And if these tanks were a little more aggressive, and there they go, about getting position here, he could easily deny this base. He could probably even come back over here and re-siege the production lines. And like I said, if you ever siege a Terran's production lines to the point where they'll just never break it, then that's game over right there. Supplies are still hilariously in favor of Mario, even though Spectre has a ginormous bank. And this is exactly what I'm talking about. Because he doesn't have any tanks, he can't possibly defend his position. And Mario's just all over him, putting tanks in the right positions once again. So, just being as irritating as possible. And here's another drop on top of the tank to try and get rid of it. Of course, this one doesn't work because the 2 missile turrets were there. Oh! Yeah, just barely doesn't kill that tank. So, yeah, continuing on here. I guess Marine tank is a little bit repetitive. You know, I think this is actually good for this replay. It goes on for a few more minutes, but the superior tank count for Mario really just runs him over at the end of this game. I don't know that there's really a whole lot more to say about this, so let's just jump into the next one. Like I said in TvT, there's a lot of different versatility that's available to you. That one was a little more linear, and you may feel a little more of a linear quality in some of your games, but a lot of times you'll see very diverse things come down from higher level players. And if you can mimic that, of course, it'll get into more interesting games and more fun games. So, yeah. So we're just going to jump into this game as well. Obviously, we'll just let it run for just a little bit. This is Polt versus Revenge, also from the same tournament that I casted, along with In Control. Polt is a really good TvT player, and this is an interesting game that I thought we could learn from. It'll really demonstrate the importance of tanks, and it'll demonstrate the importance of momentum and expanding behind your momentum, which we'll definitely see in this game. So, one different thing that Polt's doing is he's opening up gas first, which is going to lend itself to more aggressive tech openers. And that's something we didn't really see the last game. We just saw a Reaper aggression that was basically blind countered by the Marauders. There wasn't a whole lot to learn from that, but other than you need an answer to a lot of Reapers, because that could have gotten out of control if you didn't have the Marauder with the slows. With the slowing shells, that is, anyway. But the gas first opener, like we talked about in the TvT opener videos, that's going to lend it to a lot faster tech, and most of the time you're going to see a Cloak Banshee opener on that. So I'd say the 2 things you really need to look out for at the early parts of the game is a Reaper opener or a Banshee opener. You need to have options to defend both. So let's just go ahead and watch these openers run just a tad. So on the other side, we can see Revenge is not really doing anything too special right now. I mean, this looks just like a Reaper opener if I had to guess. Yeah, there's the Reaper right now. And again, gas at the exact same supply as your barracks. So you go barracks and you wait for some money, and then you make a refinery, and then you make an SEV. Your gas timing should line up almost perfectly to start a Reaper right away once your barracks is done. But you can even see the starport coming down now, so this is definitely going to be a Cloak Banshee opener. Now, as far as the Reaper, this is actually pretty risky against a Reaper opener from Polt. If he were fighting the same Reaper opener from Spectre, he might be in a lot of trouble. But the difference is that this map is a lot better to try and defend Reapers, because there's only a limited amount of jump-up points. And that's why you can see Polt positioning his Marines in different places around his base. But up comes the Banshee and Cloak, so we need to see what kind of response Revenge has for that, because you're going to see this all the time in your own games, is a Cloak Banshee opener. Most of the time, a Viking is decent. A decent Marine count is okay. Sometimes you can use mines. But the best straight-up counter to it is just your own Raven to start off, and then a Viking right afterward. And that usually does better off of a gas first opener, but you will have troubles against some other builds as well, like Marine Hellion drop or something like that. But we'll have to see what Revenge wants to do. We can see that he is opening up with a Viking, but he's also scouting out with this little army to make sure that he can deny any sort of greedy plays here. One thing you'll notice is that whenever there's a Cloak Banshee opener that tries to expand at the same time, they're really not going to have many units on the field, which is why Revenge was able to get up there and be a little bit of aggressive. And here's the Banshee, and this is really annoying, stopping the turret before it's done. But at the same time, he's forcing him to burn scans. This Viking should probably barely kill the Banshee, and yeah, it does die there. So, yeah, I mean, overall he did well against that. He hasn't really taken any damage right now. There's a second Banshee out, and if you can get the Raven Viking up, which we can see the Raven coming out now, it's going to be a really big advantage for you, because you're going to be able to detect and shoot down any Banshees, hopefully before they do too much damage. But at the same time, Polt's starting to just be a little bit aggressive here, and we're going to just see this aggression be pretty much non-stop, which is a really strong style in TvT if you can keep up your macro behind it. So let's just fast forward just a little bit until these attacks start. So Banshee comes forward. You can see it's being detected easily by the Raven, since Banshee shouldn't do much of anything, assuming everything goes as to plan. These Marines up here are kind of a problem, though, and this is what I was talking about earlier. Marine and Hellion plays can cause some trouble for this Raven Viking opener. But the interesting thing as well, if your opponent opened Cloak Banshee and they're being a little bit greedy about it, you can go for Cloak Banshees of your own to try and counter it, just hoping that they won't have a Viking and they will hopefully be putting on some more aggression. We can see that Polt actually does have a Viking. But still, you can get into some weird game situations where you get a lot better trades. Sitting here at the Watchtower is a really smart idea from Polt as well, just because he can get the first shot on basically anything that walks up there. But yeah, so Cloak is on the way for revenge. And this is one thing I really have to mention. Since you know that Polt was already being aggressive, if you don't have tanks to respond to this, which Revenge has absolutely 0 tanks right now, you can see his unit count is right here, how are you ever going to break the positioning on these tanks? One thing you could try to do is try to target it down with the Banshee and the Raven, but at the same time, there's so many Marines here that you have to find a way to deal with both, and the tank effectively would deal with both because its positioning power is so strong. So we're going to see Revenge take a lot of damage from this timing simply because he does not have a tank. So you definitely need to factor a tank into your earlier TvT builds, and you definitely need to find a way to deal with things like Cloak Banshee and Reaper all the time. If you can check against all of those, then you're going to be in great shape, and I would really recommend finding an opener that's comfortable for you that checks against all of those. He needs to cancel his depot. But look at this. I mean, he's losing depots. He has absolutely no claim to this positioning because he has no tank. His Banshee is doing okay back in the main, but I mean, all it's done so far is damage to Tech Lab. 0 kills on the Banshee, and if he doesn't get any kills with that, then that investment's totally wasted. So you need to be aware of stuff like this. You need to have an answer for all these different things that could come toward you. If he even had one tank right here with okay protection, maybe a Banshee, maybe a Raven with an auto turret, he would be in perfect shape. And you can see, here's the Banshee trying to come down here and at least whittle down the Marine count so he can deal with the tanks. At the same time, if he's not careful, he can easily get that scanned and killed. And that's exactly what we're going to see right here. So you can't afford to be this careless in TvT. Just barely gets away. Only 8 help on that. But, I mean, he's already lost a lot of SCVs, or at least he will be losing quite a few in the future. Yeah, 11 workers killed so far, only because he just decided to not make a tank, and that's a big, big deal. Fast forwarding, the tanks are still alive. The tanks are even killing SCVs on their own. So this is really irritating. And from this point, look at the supplies, 83 to 60. And this is what any mirror matchup comes down to, is getting good trades. So far, right now, we can see that Revenge has lost more, and he's had less workers basically the entire game. So Polt is in a huge advantage here, and one thing you need to do in TvT, either one side or the other, is if you get a good trade, you need to continue being aggressive and pushing them back and making sure that you press that advantage. Or you need to go into some really unexpected and strong tech. So if, for example, Polt were to take a third base behind his lead and switch into something like a second or third factory and start making just a ton of tanks, in response to the mech that he should know is coming down here from Revenge, considering the factory count, then all of a sudden Revenge is behind in tanks when his whole build relies on that. You could even do something a little more unusual and start making a lot of Banshees or something like that just to deal with his tanks. Considering all he has right now is 1 Viking and 1 Raven, if you just make a lot of Vikings of your own and get air control, suddenly those Banshees are unchecked, suddenly he can't make tanks. It makes for a lot of different options that you can play if you have a lead like this. So Polt's option is going to be just to continue to be aggressive. And here he comes up once again, and hey, what do you know? Revenge still, where's his tanks? He has none. And again, he's going to have a hell of a time trying to push this off, simply because he can't claim position. So Polt's just going to be able to walk up there, do pretty much whatever he wants, and simply, this all basically started because he skipped 1 tank. He skipped 1 tank, and then he kept continuing to skip tanks. Look at this, he has to lift off his natural against Polt, who is taking a 3rd command center right now. I can't overstress enough the importance of having tanks early in this matchup. Now he has a tank out, but guess what? He's already done the damage he needs to. He could easily just go home and be happy with this, because he's at a 40 supply lead. He's mining on 2 bases, where his opponent's really only mining on 1 right now. Secret Missile coming down and kill the tank. That's decent, but even still, there's basically nothing protecting his tanks. He could lift up in his medevacs and just drop right on top of him. There's basically no limit to the options that Pol has right now, and it's really starting to show. So I'm just going to fast forward here because this eventually does get pushed away. So the command center does get relanded here from Revenge. Now look back at home. I mean, even if you stop an attack like that, what's next? How are you going to stop the next stage? And Polt's already walking across the map with a huge army. Revenge has what, 2 tanks? Oh no, he has 4 tanks now, I'm sorry. Since he is making them 2 at a time, he will start to catch up. But at the same time, now that he has tanks, now he has no mobility. And all of a sudden, Polt's dropships are going to be a huge deal. And if Polt can ever get positioned on top of this production lines and Revenge can't break that, then that's game over. So, again, all spiraling completely out of control simply because he decided to not make the 1 early tank. And again, Polt expanding behind his aggression, which is always what you want to do. There's no way Revenge is ever going to take a 3rd base as long as Polt has anything to say about it. And even if he gets poor trades here, at least he's getting an economic advantage to the point where it actually doesn't really matter if his attacks don't kill him and if he trades poorly. But still, he is trading pretty decently, and eventually those attacks do get cleaned up. But let's look back at Polt's base. He has another army pretty much ready to go that's still larger than Revenge's at this point. And more importantly, the economic advantage is just getting so insurmountable. There's really no way Revenge can come back. So yeah, I guess that'll do it for this game. I just wanted to demonstrate the idea behind constant aggression, what you need to do behind that, and how you're supposed to hold that off. And if you just skip steps and you be a little bit lazy about that, then you're going to run into a lot of big problems. So the last game I'm going to show you is a bio versus mech game, which is something that a lot of TvTs actually get into quite a day, nowadays. And we're going to show you the different ways that you need to manage both sides of this. Of course, these are 2 barcodes. I think the red barcode actually is Mario again, if I had to guess, based upon his playstyle. And he's very easily has access to a lot of his replays, so that's why I tend to pull some from him. But yeah, we'll have to see where these 2 guys go in this game, and we'll have to see what we can learn from this game as well. So it looks like Barracks coming up right on the same time as the refinery. So this looks like a Reaper build, at least maybe a delayed Reaper. I don't think it was on the exact same supply, considering the gas doesn't really match up right now. So maybe a Marine and then a Reaper, or is he just going to wait? Well, it looks like he wants to just wait for the Reaper. So, oh, I guess I'm wrong again. This is actually just a reactor opener. Either way, on the other side of the map, it looks like, again, this is a pretty fast gas factory on the way. I would say this is actually gas first from the blue player. Maybe that's... yeah, I must have just gotten the 2 confused, but gas first is on the way, and this should more than likely be a Banshee opener, which we're going to have to see what the red player's defense is against this. So, right now, he's just making only Marines, and that can be pretty risky against Banshee openers. If you're in this kind of space where there's a Banshee basically already heading towards your base and you don't have anything for it, one thing you can do is kind of just dump out an emergency mine and burrow it somewhere and try to just push the Banshee away, and if they just take the mine damage, then that's a big win for you because they'll have to scan just to kill the mine, and that's a waste. But SCV coming up here, trying to realize what's going on. Even just by seeing this unit count, he can probably figure it's a Banshee of some sort, maybe a command center behind it, but Banshee is more likely. And actually, I'm wrong. This is actually just going to be a Marine Hellion opener. So I guess I should pay a little more attention to the add-ons here. But this is one of the builds where if you just go for a blind Raven and Viking against what you suspect to be a Banshee opener, this opener is built to counter that, and it's built to look like it as well. So say you were to scout this starport coming up, and buildings lined up like this, you may mistake this for a Banshee opener. But in reality, it was actually just a really fast gas into a Hellion Marine drop that can actually just outright kill the build that's supposed to outright counter Cloak Banshee. So there's a lot of circular kind of plays, a little bit of circular logic there. So you need to find an opener that's fairly middle of the road and be ready to react to things like this. One thing you can do is if you know the timing of when a Cloak Banshee should start, which is I'd say about 5 minutes, you can drop a scan just to be sure. And then if you're in the point where you're making a Raven or something, you can always cancel it and make something else that will help you defend from an attack like this. So just be wary of the different options that you'll have in these kinds of openers as well. But oftentimes just knowing what things look like and how one build counters another can actually add up to a win in your favor a lot of times. So the drop's coming in here now. You can see that he has plenty to defend against this. There really shouldn't be any problem. Everything falling quite quickly. 2 Hellions coming in being pretty cute, but at the same time, not really a worthwhile investment, especially considering the command center is up so much faster for the red player. Blue player grabbing a Viking now, realizing he doesn't really know what's going on. But the Viking, there's really no reason not to make it. There's actually 2 Vikings coming out here for the red player as well. This is going to be a big demonstration in the fact that the air battle makes a big difference. Mainly because if you have the air dominance to where your opponent's never going to be able to get enough Vikings up, then all of a sudden Banshees rule the sky, you can switch into battle cruisers, you can get a lot of Ravens up, and Ravens have a ton of utility. So the Viking count, honestly, is sometimes more important than the tank count. So this is why I said before that a lot of games will turn into tank Viking versus tank Viking, because people realize that those are probably the 2 most important counts in the game to be ahead in. But either way, here's a random little push coming out here, the blue player. And honestly, considering the red player does have good positioning with his tank, he shouldn't have too much problem. And if he tries anything cute like picking up in the medevacs, these Banshees can always snipe that down and make a quick work of it. And we'll notice now the count is 3-3. This is the kind of situation where you probably want to pull a couple of workers to repair your Vikings, because winning this Viking battle is so enormous. This is something we haven't covered yet. But the fact that the tank can shoot this far doesn't mean it can actually see that far. The tank, you can see its range only extends out to about right here. So if you have something spotting for you, such as a Viking, you're going to grant your tanks basically 1 or 2 extra range just to reach out this far. I think that's actually 2 range. And it's going to be a big deal in tank versus tank fights. So that's the primary reason why you want the Viking advantage, is to spot for your tanks. I realize this video's gone on quite long, and I don't want to make videos that are too long, but I also want to give you guys good information, so try to just hurry this up a little bit. You can see the production lines being sieged now, but it's not that big of a deal, I don't think. He should be able to push this away okay. He is taking a little bit of damage here, having to repair his tank. I'm going to buy a little bit of time, but ultimately he hasn't lost too much. Maybe a depot, a couple of SCVs here and there, but still, his command center was faster, he'll be fine. And now he's able to push that away, so no big deal. At the same time, he's also being smart, sending a couple Hellions back here to try and deal some SCV damage as well. But we're going to probably watch the rest of this game on 2x speed, just to kind of condense the information a little more, because you guys have heard quite a bit. The only thing we're really going to see a lot in this game is things like dropping on top of tanks, the importance of air control, the importance of positioning, stuff like that, which is really standard in TvT. So up comes another fight. The Viking count 2 versus 3, but the first shot went to blue several times, so you can see messing that up is kind of a big deal. The other thing you can do is if your opponent is trying to get the air control by way of the Marines killing the Vikings, I don't know what the deal is with those clicks, but eventually, every once in a while it just flies off the screen. But if the Marines try to come up here and kill the Vikings, you can always try and bait them back into your tanks and kill them that way. Of course, these tanks will have better spotting because he does actually have the Viking advantage here in the middle between these tank lines. So there's not a whole lot that Red can do right now. I guess he's just trying to keep him honest. And the good thing for Blue, we talk about positioning so much, you'll notice that Red's positioning was clear back up in his base on both fronts, and he lost a lot of ground because of that. Now Blue is being more aggressive and more assertive and pushing out there and saying, I want this space. You can't have this space as long as I'm here. So if you want to be cute and try to go around and drop, you can, but you don't have any medevacs, so that's never going to work. So yeah, positioning really important here, and you can see Blue dealing with this so much better because he has just way better positioning on him. Now the things are starting to make sense. There's medevacs coming out here as well. He can start to try and circumvent this army if he wants to. The blue flame coming down is definitely going to tell you mech. So the red player is going to be the one that's meching between these two guys. And we'll see as that develops as far as everything this goes on. And I know we're kind of rushing through here, but honestly there's points in this game where there's just not a lot to talk about because they're just kind of getting position here. Now this is something smart that we haven't quite seen yet. It's a good siege up for position inside of your opponent's base. Your idea here is just to get good trades and to force your opponent to attack into you. So the importance of position is if you can make your opponent attack into your already sieged tanks, you're going to get a way better trade than you're supposed to. And this army is actually pretty small in comparison to the blue army, but the fact that he has position is going to make it so that he'll trade pretty well. He won't win the fight, but again, it's just getting an advantage and running with that advantage again. And also, we should note, expansion behind the aggression. Continually redropping everything in here. The Vikings, the air control is definitely in Red's favor. So Red does have a good spotting advantage here, but at the same time Blue also has spotting because he has buildings here. The other really cute thing is there's a missile turret coming down to prevent drops on top of the tank, so that's kind of weird. Interesting nonetheless. Now if you're trying to break a position like this, which happens all the time in TvT, the main thing you need against siege tanks is just surface area. So let's zoom out And note that Terran's arc is huge. It's like a 90-degree arc hitting these tanks. And tanks, the best they can do is just hit maybe a couple of times somewhere in these spots, like maybe here and here, and that's about it. So getting a big spread like this and attacking in to try and break this is more important. You can't just single file your whole army into a siege up position like this. So we can see the arc is coming down, the tanks are just waddling forward, and he just crushes right through that. But still, I'd say Red got a better trade than he should have with those army sizes. So, yeah, we'll zoom back in here, I guess. Now we're finally seeing Mech come down. Mech is very reliant on Hellions and tanks, or rather, Hellbats and tanks. Blue Flame being on there is really important as well. And the reason that you want Hellbats is to buffer damage for your tanks if they just decide to attack into you, but also to drop on top of their tanks, since they have a really nice base damage for their cost. So we're seeing another little position battle here. Blue is just trying to outposition Red, just kind of setting everything up here in a point where Red really can't do anything about it. And notice, he's expanding behind this aggression once again. So this is how you take extra bases in TvT. You don't just do it and hope they don't attack you. You get up in their face and you get position that they want, so that they can't leave their position at risk of losing the game, while you just go ahead and expand behind it. So that's a really important mechanic in this matchup. So again, neither player can really attack into each other because they both have siege tanks. But at the same time, look at Red's Viking count. Red has 4 Vikings and Blue has 0. So if at any point Blue tries to walk into this area of tank fire, he's going to take fire way more than it's worth, whereas he won't be able to see that far unless he scans. So, I mean, this is basically the extent of where the tanks could fire, but they can only see it here. So if you're Red, one of the ways you can break this is you can click on one of their tanks after like flying a Viking over it. You can see where the dotted lines end, and you can kind of position your tank just barely inside those lines, get a spawning advantage on it, and then all of a sudden you can kill that tank and he can't fire back unless he scans. So if you just do that over and over, then eventually you'll be able to break these tank lines. And that's the best way to do it, considering it's the most cost effective. It also makes your opponent burn scans, which is in turn not a mule back at home. And that will result in a better economy for you over time. I think I'll make a special video on breaking siege tank lines. I did make one before, but it's pretty old, and a lot has changed since then, so I think I'm going to remake it. So if you wanted more of an overview of how to break contains like this, I think it's a really big deal in TvT, so I'll make a completely separate video for it as well. So Blue's still just trying to be as irritating as possible. A little bit of a flank here, and something we're going to see that's really smart out of Red. He's starting to try to drop on top of these tanks so that he can try and waste the tanks for his opponent and only spend Hellbats to do that. Hellbats are only 100 minerals each, and that's a lot more effective than a tank that costs gas, as well as the tank that's just so important for this matchup in general. One thing Red is doing, he realizes that he is basically contained. He can't go anywhere out on the map with his whole army. He can't try and break this all at once. So what he's going to do is just going to load up in these medevacs and try to force him to come back home. So that's another way you can break things, is that if your opponent is too invested in a forward position, and you can just send a small drop over to try and get him out of position, then that will be a big deal. Sorry, just double checking something really fast. So here we go, the drops are going to commence here for Red in just a second, and there we go, he just drops them all in there. And look at how many SCVs this kills just right away. This is one of the really powerful strengths of Mech, is that these Hellions, or these Blue Flame Hellbats, are basically throwaways. They're not that important long-term in the composition, but they have so much utility that there's really no reason not to have a lot of them. There's even a second set of drops coming out here. And here come more drops. You can even see them just fry up this tank pretty cost-effectively, considering they can be healed by the medevacs. These drops can actually just last forever if you micro them back into the medevacs properly. These Hellbats doing a lot of work, and all of a sudden, look how much stuff he has to bring home to deal with this. And maybe if he was feeling adventurous, he could try to break this, but I'd say even still, he probably won't be able to. But the biggest thing that he can do is he can start dropping Blue Flame Hellbats on this in huge numbers and break this really, really well if he wants to. The second set of drops coming back in here, trying to deal a lot of damage. But the worker count's especially important. 23 workers killed in a game where he already had the advantage. He's up by basically 20 workers right now. That's a big, big deal. So, yeah. Those drops finally cleaned up, but the supplies really speak for themselves as far as how effective that was. So here we go, lots more drops on top of these tanks here, trying to just weed them out a little bit. And like I said, if you can ever just get to a point where, okay, I'm going to stop here and stop myself. Going back to the previous point, if you can ever kill tanks effectively for these Blue Flame Hellbats, all of a sudden you have at least some surplus of Hellbats left over and a lot of tanks left over, so that you can definitely fight pretty cost effectively. But the other thing that he's noticing is that look at the arc for the blue player. He has stuff down here, he has stuff here. It extends all the way over to here, and he realizes that if I just attack right here and just eat the damage from just 2 or 3 tanks, I can just push my way through. And if he wants to have the rest of his army participate, he has to unsiege and walk all the way over there into my potentially sieged tanks by then. So this is another thing to breaking these contains, is that you need to find a weak spot and hopefully get part of his army segmented and out of position. So here we go, Hellbats continuing to drop on here. That was just trying to trade as good as possible as the blue player, knowing that his contain has basically been broken right now. And to be totally honest, if I were this this red player, I would just load these medevacs up right now and just drop right back on top of this army while walking my tanks forward, and that would break this pretty fast. You know, this video has gone on really long. We're at 45 minutes, and that's about where I usually like to stop. There's not a ton more that happens in this game, so I think we're just going to stop here and call this good. There's a lot to know about TvT, especially breaking those tank lines in particular. I'm sorry I couldn't find any games where people really got into battlecruisers, but trust me that late game battlecruisers along with Ravens and Vikings is basically the strongest army you're ever going to be able to get in TvT. So look out for those transition points, but if you have any other questions, feel free to leave them down in the comments. I'll be back with more videos very, very soon, as I'm trying to make them once per day over the summer. So we'll see if I'm able to keep up on that. But in the meantime, take care and have a good one.